We're back for round two. Make sure you see the first part of this video. Make sure you see video number one. This is take two, video number two in this conversation about the Ukraine war. So you can pick up where you left off there.
All right, well, what I was saying is this. When I say that no American president, Democrat or Republican, would have behaved any differently from Vladimir Putin if placed in the same situation, here is what I mean. Imagine that a communist movement aligned with the Chinese, or a movement aligned with the Russians, decided to back a rebel faction in Mexico, and because they wanted Mexico to join into an alliance with them. And so there's a pro-American government in Mexico like now, that wants to have, the relationship with the United States. But you have another one, a faction, and there have been such factions in Mexico, probably some now, who say, fuck the Yankees, They took all our country. Remember, California, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada were all once a part of Mexico. Think of that. Think of the different economic position that Mexico would be in today if Texas was still a part of Mexico, or California. Why do you think these states have all those names like San Antonio, Texas, San Diego, California, San Francisco, Los Angeles? You think they just get these names and say, no, these were partners. Mexico at that time was known as New Spain. In the beginning, it was first known as New Spain. And this was all a part, of their territory. These territories were taken from Mexico by wars, through wars. The United States just took them, right? So now there's a movement, among them who feel like, that these Yankees are our enemies. They have all they've done is exploit us and rob us and what have you. So there are people who feel that. So I suppose a faction like that was trying to overthrow the Mexican government that we have now. And the United States happened to pick up, managed to break into, to intercept a call from the undersecretary, the minister for North American Affairs in the Chinese foreign relations department, the foreign ministry of China. They picked up a phone call by the official who's in charge of relations in North America, and heard him giving his ambassador instructions of how to help the rebels overthrow the government. What do you think the United States would do? What do you think they would do? They were willing to blow up the world over little Cuba. You understand? The United States, there's a book called In Search of Enemies. There's a documentary called The Brothers about the John Foster Dulles, who was Secretary of State, and Allen Dulles, his brother, who was head of the CIA, when they overthrew the government in Iran, when they overthrew the Arbenz government in Guatemala and caused all those thousands of people to be murdered and whatnot. You know what I mean? The United States would not tolerate for 1 minute the kind of things that they expect the Russians to accept. I'm talking about, it doesn't matter whether it's a Democrat or Republican. Imagine if you had an alliance between the Chinese and the Russians, and they had gotten Canada to join the alliance. And now they're trying to get Mexico to join the alliance. What would the United States do? If you think that any American president would sit silently by and allow that to happen, then don't take no wooden nickels. I have to warn you, understand what I'm saying? Please don't take no wooden nickels. The whole history of the United States. First of all, it's enough to talk about, you understand, the fact that we have the Monroe Doctrine. Okay? That we would not allow it. Now, why is it that the United States thinks that it can do things to other nations that it will not accept itself? It's because of two ideas. One is called two theoretical positions. One is called American exceptionalism. The other one is called Pax Americana. Okay? These are the two basic ideas that drive American foreign relations. American exceptionalism, boiled down, simply means this. We are the exceptional nation of the world. God, you hear some of these real wackos talk about how the Constitution was crafted by God, given to us. Well, I should point out to you that I'm skeptical of any claims that people make about something being created by God, right? Okay? So, until God appears to me and tell me that this is what he intends, to me, it's just all talk. Because first of all these God people got a different story. They all got a different story, you understand? And they can't all be right. Some of the stories are direct contradiction with each other. So I don't know what leads. So I'm going to stick to what I can prove, right? So God didn't create the Constitution. Men created it. That's why they left slavery intact, That's why, they could create something like 3/5, a compromise where, they decided that in order to get these Southerners to support the federal union, they would count some of their slaves. The Southerners wanted all their slaves counted for in terms of representation. So they made a compromise. Okay, well, we would, for every 3 slaves, every 5 slaves or whatever it is, we would count them as one person. You know what I mean? That's how the
people, black people are 3/5.
Yeah.
Because you explained that to me before, and I didn't understand that.
That was for the purpose of counting representation, right? So the thing is that this doctrine.
Somebody wrote, didn't Mexico allow China's ships to dock in Mexico, I think?
Oh, yeah, but that's just trade. I'm not talking about trade. I'm talking about forming a military alliance with China. A military alliance. NATO is a military alliance. I'm not talking about trade. You know what I mean? No, a military alliance. For the Chinese to join a military alliance where the Chinese put their military base in China. I'll give you an example about American exceptionalism in Pax Americana. Let me just explain what that is. Pax Americana is taken from the concept of the Pax Romana. The Pax Romana refers to the period in which Rome dominated the world. When people would say all roads lead to Rome. And the way the Romans did it, there was a great British historian, Dr. Arnold Toynbee, one of the great Regis Professor of History of the Modern World at Oxford. He wrote a book called America in the World. And this is a book you can find in the library. And in this book, he explains how the American Empire resembles the Roman Empire more than it does, say, the British Empire, the French Empire, or any of those empires. They resembles the Roman Empire because what the Romans did, unlike the British, or the French, for instance, with their colonial, or like the United States, which are colonial settlers. They came here and they wiped out the indigenous population and just stole the land, took it. But in their relationships with other nations across the seas, what they do is they get these arrangements where they can build American military bases on their soil. And some of these arrangements are like perpetual. Like, you ever wonder why Guantanamo, this American naval base, is still on Cuban soil when the United States has not had diplomatic relations with Cuba in half a century? How is it that we have a military base on Cuban soil, Guantanamo? Because they had coerced the Cubans into giving them a perpetual lease. And the Cubans don't have the military might to eject them.
Oh, wow.
So they just stay there. We have an American military base right on Cuban soil. So they've done this. Now, you will hear the United States say, you hear all the time people talk about China is becoming aggressive. China is becoming expansive. China is a nation of 1.5 billion people. 1.5 billion people. Now we only a little over 300 million. So China got about 1.2 billion more people than us. You understand what I'm saying? The Chinese have one military base that's not on their soil. They have one overseas military base, and that's in Somalia. It's Djibouti, on the Red Sea. It's a naval base. You know how many military bases the United States has? 800.
Damn.
In 70 different countries.
Wow.
Okay? And we say the Chinese, they say the Chinese are being expansionist.
So I have a question, because I don't know about this like that.
Yeah.
Why does the U.S. have so many military bases?
Because they want to rule the world. That's why. That's why you have a Pax Americana. Pax Americana means the American peace. Just like Pax Romana meant the Roman peace. What it means is a world order that's imposed, in the ancient world, it was imposed from Rome. Now it's a world order. America is the world hegemon. It's the term that political scientists use, right? Mm-hmm. After World War II, the United States was the only major nation that had not a single shot was fired on our land, in our country. All the other countries were in shambles. So the United States emerged as the debtor nation. The United States emerged, they loaned money to everybody. Everybody owed the United States. You know, the United States emerged as the undisputed power. Now soon, as I said, they had been allies with Russia, the Soviet Union. But as soon as the war was over, you know, the United States and the antagonism between the two nations returned. Mm-hmm. Now, for a minute, the United States was alone. You know, because they were the only, as a world power, because they're the only one that had nuclear weapons. Now, when the Russians got nuclear weapons in the early 50s, 1950s, that changed things. You know what I'm saying? And the United States was so upset about it, they executed this couple, the Rosenbergs, Julian and Ethel Rosenberg, because they were convinced that the only way the Russians could have built an atomic bomb is if somebody gave them the plans. And they decided that this Jewish couple, you know, who were leftists and whatnot, and who worked in the national security, they thought they gave them. And historians have disputed this, you know, in a sense. But that was their son. That was when I spoke at UMass recently, and they introduced him. That was, they said, this is the son of Julian. Yeah. And then everybody applauded. And that was a room full of historians. You know what I'm saying? Because none of them believed the story. But they executed them because they were convinced that somebody had to give it to the Russians. They couldn't figure it out. They thought, this is American exceptionalism. Nobody's smart enough to figure that out but us. And what is so interesting is that foreign scientists played such a critical role in building this. You understand what I'm saying? You know, but however, the foreign scientists, but they would argue that, yeah, these foreign scientists, but we're the only ones that had the industrial base to do it. You know, they convinced themselves that nobody else would be able to do it, and that's turned out to be a disaster because there's a lot of people now who have nuclear weapons. You know, and Einstein then was right. He should have got rid of them and banned them in the beginning. But in any case, the United States has military bases all over the world. You know, and they are determined. You know, so when the Soviet Union dismantled in 1991, people began to speak of a unipolar world. Now, I wrote a piece about this. It will be back up online soon. It's called How the Iraq War Was Hatched in a Think Tank. And the interesting thing about this piece is that I talk about the Project for a New American Century and who these people are, what they used to call the neocons, right? These people came up with the idea of a unipolar world. Professor Sachs talks about this too, if you look at it. And the unipolar world is that there's only one superpower in the world now, the United States. And therefore, you know, this is the Project for a New American Century. That's what it means. You know what I mean? Like in the early 20th century, the publisher, Henry Luce, wrote a piece called The American Century. He predicted that the 20th century was going to be the American century. This project, which was founded by Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, called, which is and Bill Kristol, people who are now all on the outs with the Republican Party. These were the ones who introduced this far right, element into the party. Now the inmates have taken over the asylum and driven them out. Liz Cheney, who used to be, I used to despise her. She was her and her daddy, Dirty Dick. I used to despise her. They represented everything, that I thought was odious. And now she has emerged as a hero, as a result of these January 6 hearings and the position she's taken on Trump. But that tells you something about politics. And it's this, that, there are no, politics, Lenin said politics make strange bedfellows. And what he means by that is that in the course of political struggle, you may end up forming alliances with people that you never thought that you would be an ally with, because Liz Cheney has been heroic, in this. And I never thought it would be anything I would admire her for, but I greatly admire her for the role that she has played here and her attempt to deal with, to stop this attempt of Donald Trump to become an American dictator. But the thing is that this whole idea of American exceptionalism, the idea of the unipolar world, that there's only going to be one superpower, the United States, this also led to, the expansion of NATO, to make it clear, to everybody, that because NATO, whatever else it is also an American vassal. NATO is an instrument of American imperial ambition. That's what it is. Now, recently, I had a debate with one of the most distinguished European professors. His name is Dr. Patrick Kors, and you can find it online. Go to WBAI FM Archives. Go to WBAI Archives. That's WBAI, part of Pacifica Network here in New York City. Go to and put my name. Playfeld with WBAI Archives. Debate with Patrick. His name is Dr. Patrick Kors. All right. If I gave you this file, is there any way you could put it on your site?
Is it a link or is it a file?
It's a link. It's a link to
I can put it below my
click
YouTube.
It on. It's a sound. It's a sound. You click it and you hear the show.
Yeah.
But Dr. Kors is a professor of international history at the University of Tuscany. Brilliant guy, Harvard, Oxford man, taught at Harvard, taught at Yale, taught at the great Humboldt University in Germany. He and I had a debate about this Ukraine war and about the role of NATO. And of course, he had just finished writing a 1,000-page book on transatlantic alliances, going from 1860, the year before the outbreak of the American Civil War, to 1930, during the rise of Hitler in Germany. And he just finished his book, and he's a real hardcore Europeanist. He's all for NATO, all for what they're doing. So this is a great matchup, because there's two people who have, really diametrically opposed views. Now, at the risk of sounding immodest, I've never lost a debate. So, and I'm always looking for, I'm like Sugar Ray Robinson, whom they call pound for pound the best fighter ever. And, when they asked Ali what that meant, Muhammad Ali said it meant that whatever weight class he's in, he'd be the best. And they say, including the heavyweight, he said, include the heavyweight, because he was Ali's idol, right? But anyway, Sugar Ray said he used to pray that God would send him a worthy opponent so he could show people how good he really was. So I look forward to a great opponent. I thought Christopher Hitchens was going to be a great opponent when we debated the Iraq War, but he crumbled after the opening statement. But Dr. Kors, is a very smart guy, and so if you listen to this, you really learn something about this because we're really going a tit for tat at it. But I backed him up. Eventually I told him, I said, listen, man. First of all, here's the thing. Europeans have dragged the world into war twice in the 20th century. The whole world, because of some dispute between European states. I don't want to see them drag the world into another war, not now when all these people got nuclear weapons, because I'm going to tell you something. the Russians are not going to be, they're not going to be overrun. They're not going to be, they will, I have no doubt, that if the national existence of Russia is at stake, they will use nuclear weapons just like the United States is prepared to use nuclear weapons. Now, nuclear weapons, when they argue in defense of keeping these weapons, they say that they are a deterrent. But that's a dangerous game to play. You understand what I'm saying? What do you mean a deterrent? Suppose you have some fool, who ain't scared. You understand what I'm saying? Who say, you're deterrent my ass, if you do such and such, I'm blowing y'all up. Now what you gonna do then? And this is a position, that Putin is taking. Their nuclear policy is, if our national existence is at stake, we will use these nuclear, and they got the biggest nuclear arsenal in the world. The Russians can destroy, they can reduce every city in America from coast to coast to ashes in 20 minutes from now. All right? 20 minutes from now, they can, all of America could be radioactive rubble. Now, the people, when you say that to people, they say, well, we'll get them too. Does that make you sleep easier at night? I mean, does that, the fact that we can do it to them too? Because we're operating under what is known as the MAD doctrine. Okay? This has been the doctrine, since I was there in 50-something years ago. MAD, mutual assured destruction. Okay? That's the doctrine. That's what's kept anybody from using them, because if you use them on us, we're going to use them on you. And so if you do it, your destruction is assured. So we're mutually assured destruction. That's what's kept people in line. But you see, the thing is, people who understand these weapons, like I understand them, nobody thinks that that's exactly how it will happen. The way it will happen is the way that things are happening right now. What Putin has told them. He's put his strategic nuclear weapons on alert. This is what I was telling Patrick, Professor Kors. He's told you, I got the Satan tool. I'm putting my strategic nuclear weapons on alert. Now, there's two kinds of nuclear weapons. There are tactical nuclear weapons and there's strategic nuclear weapons. Now, they talk about the possibility of them using tactical nuclear weapons. I think that's all some bullshit. I believe if anybody use any kind of nuclear weapon, they're not going to be able to stop it. This thing, once anybody uses a nuclear weapon, this thing is going to very quickly get out of control. That's one problem. The other problem is it could happen by accident. It could happen by accident because there are certain scenarios that if they develop, because the main thing is don't get hit with your shit on the ground. You know what I'm saying? Don't get hit and get your stuff knocked out where you can't respond. So that means that the response has to be a lightning response. The minute that you are convinced that you are under attack, then you release everything you got. So what happens if you get a false alarm? And that has happened a couple of times. People don't know. One time, a flock of geese almost set off a nuclear war. So, and then you don't know how good the Russian equipment is. They can make a mistake and think they're being under attack. So it's a mess. It's a real mess. And the lesson here is nuclear armed nations should avoid any kind of military conflict. And that being the case, continuing to pour weapons into Ukraine is only pushing the world closer to disaster. The Ukrainians are already meeting. The Ukrainians are already meeting. I mean, look at them. All these people sitting up there in cold in the dark and whatnot. And you got this little clown, Zelensky, walking around taking bows. You understand what I'm saying? Wearing a costume like he's some kind of soldier. He was on the front line. That motherfucker wasn't on the front line. He might have went somewhere near the front line to talk to people, but the front line is where people getting shot at, for real. You understand what I'm saying? And he wasn't there. And so here he is. He's an actor. So you put him on stage and he's great and whatnot. But when you look at what has happened to his country since he took power, there's no way you can say that this guy is a competent leader. There's no way you can say he was a clown who had a sitcom where he played the president of Ukraine and decided to run for the presidency and won. That's who he is, okay? And he's no more qualified to run the United States than Trump was to run here. You know, in fact, he may be even less qualified.
So
You know what I mean?
somebody asked, what is your opinion about Africa engaging with Russia and China instead of the USA?
Well, you know, Biden just had this big summit here. He had all these African leaders to come in and whatnot because he's worried about that. You understand what I'm saying? Look, the Chinese have been willing to come in. As a matter of fact, I just got through hearing the president of Ghana talk about this just today at a forum at the Harvard Kennedy School, their African their forum on politics in the African Studies Department of their promoted this. I just heard the president of Ghana talk about this today. The Chinese have, whereas the United States are waging wars everywhere, destroying stuff, making enemies, the Chinese have something they call one road, one belt. And instead of exporting war and destruction everywhere, they are building infrastructure, you know, building roads, you know, buying the resources of these countries, you understand, helping them to modernize. Now, you know, Africans they're siding with the people who side with them. You know, Africans have their own interests, you know, and back when Mandela came here, you know, if you go on YouTube and look up Mandela's interview with Ted Koppel, and he told Ted Koppel was going to lecture him about the fact that, you know, he was good friends with Fidel Castro. You know, there's a picture online of when Fidel Castro visited. Fidel Castro was the first foreign leader that Mandela invited to South Africa. And the crowds that turned out to greet him was Mandela-like crowds. And there's this picture of Mandela and him running to embrace each other, you know, You know, you can go on YouTube and then look up Mandela and Castro and look. And when Ted Koppel asked Mandela, you know, about his relationship with Castro, he said, listen, he said, we in South Africa have our own struggle. And we are friends with those who help our struggle. We relate to people on the basis of the way they relate to us. He said, Fidel Castro not only gave lip service, he sent us aid. They trained hundreds of doctors. You know, they trained soldiers. In Angola, it was the black Cuban volunteers that helped turn the tide against South Africa and drive them out of northern Angola. You know, Castro was a hero to all of the liberation leaders, you know, of Africa. You know, so and so he told Ted Koppel, he said, listen, you Americans make a mistake. Your enemies are not my enemies. You understand what I'm saying? They're your enemies. They're not mine. You understand? I relate to people on the way they relate to me. Now, the Russians, during the period of the African liberation movement, the Russians supported the African liberation at the same time that the United States was supporting the white colonists. You know? And the United States included the apartheid government of South Africa in their list of nations in the free world. They used to call them a part of the free world, you know, the apartheid South Africa, you know. And of course, one of the reasons why the United States identified with these people is because the history of whites in South Africa is a lot like the history of whites in the United States. They're settler colonialists. Mm-hmm. You understand what I'm saying? And they had similar systems that they set up. Mm-hmm. So even though the Russians who supported the African liberation movement it was in the period of the Soviet Union, nevertheless, the Russians had never been colonists in Africa, you know? And so, and the Chinese, like I said, the Chinese are offering real help and developmental aid to African countries. So, you know, why shouldn't they have alliances with them? You know, and in the United States, look at America's history with Africa. Aside from the slave trade, you know, in which they took millions of Africans from the continent and brought them here into one of the most hellish systems the world has ever seen. And then they supported all the colonial powers, you know. So this has been the problem ever since the rise of African independence movements. That was the fear that the Africans would align themselves, with the Russians, and the Chinese. And this is why you have, all of this history of coups in Africa, where progressive leaders being overthrown by traitors, people like Kanye West, that hooked up with the enemies of the African people. Every time you see one of these coups, you see, like in the Congo. Congo is one of the richest places in Africa. They have every kind of mineral and what have you. And the Congo was much bigger than several times bigger than the country of Belgium, And when they finally gained independence, they didn't want to see them go. They did everything they could, and they ended up getting Mobutu to organize a plot to assassinate Patrice Lumumba, and then they recognized him as the president of the Congo. This is a pattern that was repeated all over Africa. So Africans are wise to deal with everybody the way they deal with them. The United States want Africans to look kindly upon the United States, then treat them that way. You understand? To do things that will create real fraternity and brotherhood.
Somebody asks, what do you think about China and the USA in regards to Taiwan?
I think that, that's a very good question. Because what you see happening around Taiwan is the same kind of thing that's happening around Russia and Ukraine. What I mean by that, the United States is building something. Here's the first thing you have to understand. Because America is bordered by the Pacific and Atlantic, this country claims to be both an Atlantic and a Pacific nation. So that means that anywhere in the world that you go, whether it's in the Atlantic or the Pacific region, you are potentially a danger to American interests. Let's put it this way. All right. Now, Taiwan, the United States is building what they call the Quad. Japan, Australia, South Korea, and the Philippines. Also in this they're building this ring around China in the Pacific, to try and contain China. Right now, the same kind of thing as NATO. But Taiwan is a nation. Taiwan is a fiction. Here is how Taiwan became a nation. The Chinese had a revolution. Chinese had been under the British colonial rule, and then the Japanese invaded them, the Japanese fascists and whatnot. They had a revolution led by Mao Zedong and the Red Army, the army of the Chinese Communist Party. They fought this revolution for 30 years or so. And they finally came to power, in 1948, right after, the conclusion of World War II. The opposition force against the Mao Zedong in China in the Civil War. It was a civil war. The leader of the opposition movement was the Kuomintang. It was the Chinese Communist Party on one side, the Kuomintang on the other, and the leader of the Kuomintang was Chiang Kai-shek. Now, both Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek had been proteges of Sun Yat-sen. Sun Yat-sen, was the first great nationalist leader, to lead China out of this colonial and semi-colonial situation that they had fallen to after the British invasion in the 19th century, 1940s. So, when Chiang Kai-shek lost the election, just lost the Civil War, just like in Cuba, when Castro came to power in Cuba, the United States wouldn't accept it. Well, they wouldn't accept the Chinese Revolution either, but, talking about starting a war in China, you understand what I'm saying, when they had just come through World War II, and Mao Zedong said, if they want to take us on, they got to be prepared to send a couple of million men over here, because the Chinese, they were massive. So what they did was encouraged Chiang Kai-shek, his defeated forces left mainland China and went to Taiwan. Now, mind you, there were people living on Taiwan. They just subjugated them. They took over Taiwan, and the United States quickly recognized them as the Chinese government. Now, this little island, for many years, all through the 1950s, this was known as China. You know, this is even up until the Nixon. It was, the United States would not recognize mainland China, which had millions, hundreds of millions of people, 1 billion people. They wouldn't recognize them. They said Taiwan is China. In the United Nations, the Chinese seat was occupied by Taiwan. So Taiwan is an American creation. Largely, I'm talking about as an independent country. You know, it's largely an American creation, to serve as a bulwark against communist China, as an American outpost. You know, against People's Republic of China. Now, the Chinese, of course, it was originally it was a part of China. So the China it would be as if somebody came and took Alaska and said, you know, Alaska is no longer a part of the United States. The United States wouldn't stand for that. The Chinese have had to go along with this because of American military might. But they have always said that they are going to reintegrate Taiwan into China. It is a part of China, and they intend to one day to take Taiwan back. And so the United States has made it their business to try, and they formed, first of all, they have a mutual defense treaty with Taiwan. So if China were to invade Taiwan, it's just like Article 5 in NATO. Article 5 in NATO, which Trump said was a suicide pact, and it was. You know, it says if Taiwan gets involved in a military conflict with China, the United States will militarily come to the aid of Taiwan. Now, that's why it was so reckless when Nancy Pelosi went over there recently. And I like Nancy Pelosi, but that was a dumb move. You know, I mean, but American foreign policy, in terms of American exceptionalism and Pax Americana, is bipartisan. Both the Democrats and the Republicans share this view. Nancy Pelosi, when she went over to Taiwan, that historians will probably view this as the most foolish move of her career, because she could have started a war. She very nearly did start a war. You know, the Chinese showed up, started doing, you know, military shows of force, you know, with all the naval planes, putting their planes in the sky and the battleships coming. And an incident could easily have occurred in the days following that between the Chinese and the American navies or something that started a war, you know. And why did she do it? Well, one of the main reasons she did it is the same reason why politicians from Florida take the positions they take against Castro, because they got that big Cuban exile community there, you know, who votes in a block. So in Nancy Pelosi, she's from San Francisco, you know, and you got all these Taiwanese and what have you in her district, you know what I mean? So that was just, you know, political grandstanding. But it was dangerous, you know, and it was no reason for her to do that, you know. So what do I think of Taiwan? I think that Taiwan is an American fiction. I think it is that it could very well lead to a war with China. Now, see, the United States now has another interest in Taiwan. Let me make this clear. Taiwan produces the majority of the microchips in the world. And these microchips make modern, they run the modern industrial economy. You can't do anything. You can't run a car. You can't run a refrigerator. You can't do anything without these microchips. And the majority of them come from Taiwan. They have a big complex. If the Chinese were to bomb this microchip producing complex in China, they would cripple the industrial economies of the industrial world. I was talking to a friend.
Bombing in China or in Taiwan?
In Taiwan, yeah. I was if the Chinese were to bomb that complex. Mm-hmm. Now I was talking to a friend of mine who is one of the world's leading computer scientists, engineer, Dr. Roderick Wilson, and one of the people who designed the architecture of the internet. I was asking him about why was Taiwan so crucial with these microchips, and he was telling me that he was showing me these things are very, very difficult to make. I mean, one machine to make microchips costs $350 million. This is a real rare technical feat. But I discovered though that Costa Rica is developing a microchip industry. And that's how they get in their economy off bananas. They've gone from the millions of bananas to billions in microchips. And that's one of the reasons why Costa Rica's been, but it's very, very, I don't know how they're doing it, whether they build it themselves or somebody else built the plant. But he was telling me that it's very, very hard to do and that it cannot be easily duplicated. And that's why Biden just appropriated all those billions of dollars to start in America in the microchip industry. Don't you remember just recently, the Congress appropriated all this money to lay the basis for America's own, to make America self-sufficient in microchips. Because right now, they're all depending on this microchip industry in Taiwan. And that's one of the main reasons why the United States is flexing its muscles and claiming to be willing to go to war over Taiwan, is to protect that microchip complex.
Okay, so there's another comment. We can do one more comment before we end, and then tomorrow we can talk about some other things. So, somebody said, and I can't wait to hear you address this. They said Obama killed Gaddafi for trying to unite Africa. Same thing they did to Malcolm X after he began meeting African leaders.
Well, first of all, Malcolm X was killed by his associates. And that had to do with an argument. It was an internal argument within the Nation of Islam. I knew Malcolm X. I was around Malcolm X in his last days. When Malcolm X, right up here at the Audubon Ballroom.
5 blocks from here.
Yeah, when he would have his meetings, I was at all of them. I used to, the radio program I was on in Philadelphia, Malcolm was on there all the time. Get Manning Marable's great book, Pulitzer Prize winning biography of Malcolm X. It's entitled Malcolm X, A Life of Reinventions. And read the book and see how often Malcolm was on this radio show in Philadelphia, the Listening Post. That's the show that I was on. I knew Malcolm very well, and talked to him a lot in his last days. So that's the first thing. It wasn't, they weren't afraid of, why would they be afraid of Malcolm, meeting African leaders? What were African leaders going to do? They had no power against the United States. That's nonsense. Now, about Gaddafi. There's a big mistake about Gaddafi, all right? First of all, when you talk about Obama, what Obama was trying to do, and Obama went into this very reluctantly, you understand? But what he was trying to do was prevent another Rwanda. Now, the same people who criticized Bill Clinton for allowing Rwanda to happen, the genocide in Rwanda to happen, they would have been criticizing him if he had taken steps to stop it. Because the only way he could stop it was to send the Marines over there and move against the people who were getting ready to commit the genocide before they did it. And then they would have said, oh, this is American imperialism. Look, international affairs are very complicated. Gaddafi was not the African hero that a lot of people think he was. I bet you've never read Gaddafi's book, The Green Book, which is where he lays out his political philosophy. He intended it to be like Mao Zedong's Red Book. I bet you haven't read it. And I suggest that you get it and read the section called The Blacks, all right, where Gaddafi talks about us, all right? And tell me if you are satisfied with the way he see black people, Gaddafi was, he used to think of him, he used to refer to himself sometimes as the king of Africa, and people talk about he was the main one promoting Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism started in 1900, and during the heyday of Pan-Africanism in the 1940s, which produced the first group of African independence leaders. Kwame Nkrumah, Nnamdi Azikiwe. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana was the first one to gain independence. But then Nnamdi Azikiwe, who led Nigerian independence. Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya. Deuce Muhammad Ali, in Egypt. All these people came out of the Fifth Pan-African movement. And this movement had been going on since 1900. Gaddafi started out as a progressive. He was a part of a group of radical Arab military men that included Abdel Gamal Nasser. It included Saddam Hussein. It included the FLN. They were also radical progressives. The FLN of Algeria. And these are the people who kept the Islamic jihadists or the Islamic theocrats from coming to power. Because if it hadn't been for them, the theocrats would have come to power all over the Islamic world. As a matter of fact, the whole modern jihad began in Egypt, with the Muslim Brotherhood. I have a piece on YouTube called "Why I Opposed the Iraq War from the Beginning," in which I go into all of this about the origins of the modern Islamic jihad. But Gaddafi originally was a part of this progressive group, of Arab strongmen, military men. But if you stay in power for 40 years, if nobody can criticize you, power corrupts, as Lord Acton said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But in Gaddafi's last days, listen to what he was saying about the Arab. You have people who are so confused that they want to argue that the CIA was behind the Arab Spring, when the Arab Spring was overthrowing all the people that the CIA supported. The Arab Spring was a real grassroots movement that rose among the Arab people who were tired of being ruled by tyrants. And the forces in Libya were a part of that movement, that pan-Arab movement, and Gaddafi was talking about wiping them out. There could have been another genocide, and of course we had all the intelligence. We could hear what he was saying. Barack Obama could hear what he was saying, and so he moved to stop the genocide from occurring in Libya, and Libyans killed Gaddafi. The idea that Gaddafi was this great progressive revolution. He started out as that, but he was not that. If you are a progressive revolutionary, how are you going to justify taking the people's money and hiring Michael Jackson to perform at your son's birthday party? Gaddafi was a tyrant.
Yeah, it seems that by looking at so many people's comments, they didn't understand that. So I'm glad you explained that. And somebody said, please discuss African leaders' recent summit in America. I think you did already.
Well, no, the thing is that this is an attempt by the Biden administration to bring Africans back into the fold. I haven't looked at exactly what was discussed there. This is something I'm going to be looking at this week. But the intention of it is clear. I don't know what they agreed to or what they accomplished, but I will know within a day or so when I get it, because I've been working on something else, other things, so I didn't get a chance to really to see what the details of it was. But obviously that's what it is. It's an attempt to try, because I told you, a lot of African nations are not supporting this boycott against the Russians, and the Chinese are doing business and working on projects all over Africa. The United States had a chance to build infrastructure, invest in infrastructure in Africa. They didn't. The Europeans, after robbing Africa, the United States, the Europeans, after robbing Africa, they made no attempt to invest in infrastructure and whatnot in Africa. Now, I listened, like I said, the president of Ghana today talking about it, and he think, that the relationship with the Chinese is a good thing for Africa, And I heard an Ethiopian economist who made a speech at the Harvard Business School, where he detailed. He looked at Chinese investment all over Africa and what they were doing, and he thinks it's a good thing for Africa. So, I can't be more royal than the king, so I take their word for it.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
So we will finish up for today, but people are asking again where they can hear more of you, and people are thanking you for everything you've shared. And I'm going to be doing a series of conversations with my dad because there's so many topics.
Well, you can go to my commentaries. Like I said, I'm redoing the site. I had 1,200 essays up, and I had a fight with these people, and I had to put up another site. So there's only about 40 essays on now, but they cover a range of issues. And then there's something called muckrack.com. It's a site online. If you put my name in and go to it, there's a group of about maybe 40 or 50 pieces by myself on a wide range of issues. And I'm going to start, because of my daughter, what have you, let's see what she's doing. I'm going to start a YouTube channel, within sometime right after the New Year's. I'm going to start a YouTube channel, and I will be dealing with, it's called Commentaries on the Times. So I will be commenting on everything. You all will probably be interested in the forthcoming essay I'm working on, and I don't want to discuss it now, but it's called on Kanye, Kyrie, white Christian nationalists, and the Jews. I'm doing a 4-part piece on that. I will just say this about it for the moment. The white Christian nationalists in this country, and there's people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who defines herself as a white Christian nationalist, but the white Christian nationalist movement, as represented, for instance, by the Unite to Right march in Charlottesville, Virginia, when all of these white fascists turned out in a torchlight march. Let me just tell you something about that. Those torchlight marches were a common Nazi ritual, right? And what they were chanting, blood and soil, blood and soil, blood and soil, that didn't mean anything to most people. But when I was hearing Bluten Boten, which is German. That was one of the first Nazi slogans. And what it means, blood and soil, what the slogan means is this. It was the means by which the Germans denied the Jews their German citizenship. Just like the Dred Scott decision of 1857 said that the Constitution was never intended the protections of the Constitution was never intended for black people, and that the Supreme Court voted 7-2 in Dred Scott. It said that black men had no rights that white men were bound to respect. Okay, that's what, and that deprived us of citizenship. When black people used to travel abroad, and Frederick Douglass and them traveled abroad, they just used to have a note, saying, I'm an American, because they couldn't get a passport, because they weren't considered citizens. That's what this blood and soil movement, this blood and soil slogan, that's what they did to Jews who've been living in Germany, and some of them quite well for many years. So these people were Nazis. Everything about them was Nazis, from the torches, to the slogans. However, here is what you should really pay attention to. It's the people who think that Kanye West is a wise guy or whatever. These are the people that Kanye has aligned himself with. Now, these people, these Nazis, what brought them to Charlottesville was that the Charlottesville City Council had voted to remove the statue of General Robert E. Lee from the town square. General Robert E. Lee was the commander of the Confederate armies that fought to keep us in slavery. So even though their racism brought them there, they were shouting Nazi slogans against Jews. Jews will not replace us. Jews will not replace us. What that should tell you is that this German Nazism and American white supremacy is the same class of phenomenon. They have some unique differences, but they're the same class of event. So this movement has targeted black people and Jews. This is a time when the black community and the Jewish community needs to turn to each other, not only that. And we have a history of cooperation. We've had our problems. First of all, there's no such thing as the Jews, right? There are Jewish businessmen who engage in exploitative practices against us, and then there's the Jewish progressives, the Jewish intellectuals like Herbert Aptheker, who wrote, the documentary history of the Negro in the United States. 2 million words. 2 million words. All documents from our people, beginning from the end of slavery, right up all through Reconstruction, what have you. Henry Steele Commager, one of the most distinguished and celebrated historians in America, he did a 2-volume work, 2 million words, great documents in American history, not one word by a black person. And there are many other examples, I can name. But this is a complex question. You need to know that one of the backbones of Nazism, of the Nazi movement, was the German Protestant Evangelical Church. Just like the Protestant Evangelical Church here is one of the backbones of Trumpism. And Donald Trump, I'll tell you what you should read. Go to my blog, Playfellow's Commentaries. Playthells, no apostrophe. Playthells, Commentarius. Playfellscommentaries.wordpress.com. And read the piece, go to the search engine and put, is Donald Trump a uniquely American fascist? That's what you need to read, all right? And I wrote this almost 8 years ago. I wrote this before he was elected. It's about 7 years ago I wrote this, and I identified this guy as being cut from the same cloth as Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini. And this is a detailed essay. You can see I give many examples, of the similarity between them. We are confronted with the insurgent fascist movement, okay? And its targets are the same ones in Germany, the left and the Jews, and of course us, always us. So for blacks and Jews to be in some fight about whether the ancient Hebrews were black or white is the epitome of nonsense. It is nonsense. First of all, you're talking about something that may not even be real. I'm a former history professor. There's no evidence that Moses ever walked through the damn Red Sea. That's all myth. That's religious myth, okay? There's no evidence that any of that ever happened. So they're arguing about religious myth. That stuff should be kept in the temple or the synagogue or wherever. It should not be out here interfering in the political relations between our two groups. It's all nonsense. Foolishness is what it is, okay? Whether or not the ancient Israelites were black or white don't have a damn thing to do with the fact that we are facing a fascist movement in America right now whose intention is to kill blacks and Jews, okay? All right.
Perfect. And so the video is about to run out in a minute and a half anyway, so thank you all for listening. And
Kanye West, let me just say this. Mm-hmm. The Rasta prophet Bob Marley wrote a song about Kanye West to tell us what to do. It's called "We're Gonna Chase Them Crazy Bald Heads Out of Town." All right? And this is the Bob Marley.
So, yes, I will write his website, playthelscommentaries.wordpress.com. I'll write it below, and any other links that you want to share. And we will be doing a series of conversations about a lot of things because I have many things I want to pick his brain about publicly. One of the next main topics I want to talk to him about was his mentor and involvement during the Civil Rights Movement. He had a mentor named Queen Mother Moore.
During the Black Liberation. She was in Black Liberation. Let me say this. I also have a presence on YouTube. Just go to YouTube and put my name in.
Yep. You have a million questions for my dad. He's a funny dude. Yeah, so we're going to do a lot of conversations like this because he's not just knowledgeable about black people. It's everybody on the planet, what's going on. And I've learned so much from him my entire life.
I am an earthling who happens to be black. But for black people who think, for instance, that the environmental movement is a white thing.
You got 12 seconds.
Or concerns about atomic or nuclear war is a white thing, just remember this. when it comes to the destruction of the environment and nuclear
off.
war, you will get equal treatment.